Once upon a time, Spain was all like, I'm gonna take over the Americas! Yeah, that's where all my glory is gonna shine! What? Okay, look, just go play with Western Sahara or something, okay? Just don't bother me, okay? I'm investing in your bigger brother that I care so much more about. And that child grew up to be Equatorial Guinea.
It's time to learn geography now!
Hey everyone, I'm your host Barbie. Hispanics of the world, say hi to your far-off distant linguistic African cousins that you may not even know existed. Seriously, Spanish-speaking Africans. Cool, huh? Yeah, and this is where you can find them. So, if you've never heard of this place, that's okay. Most people haven't. I mean, places like South Africa and Kenya are so in right now that it's hard for anybody else to kind of get like 3 seconds in the spotlight. First of all, although called Equatorial Guinea, the country is actually located a few degrees north of the equator, but it was kind of close enough so they're like, we'll just keep that name. Second, the country has kind of like a strange layout when it comes to its territory. There are two main parts, the mainland and the offshore insular parts. The mainland part of Equatorial Guinea is called Rio Muni and is located in Central Africa, right at the Gulf of Guinea, under Cameroon, and at the top of Gabon. The insular parts contain the islands of Bioko, located north off the coast of Cameroon, and Annobon, which lies about 660 kilometers southwest from Bioko, with Sao Tome and Principe caught right in between them, creating a nearly perfect diagonal chain of islands. Now, just like we discussed in the Cameroon episode, these islands are on what is called the Cameroon Line, which is an area on the Gulf that has active volcanic islands formed from tectonic activity. They also own the islands of Corsico, as well as the Big and Little Elobe Islands just off the southwest coast in Corsico Bay, where the Muni River empties into the ocean, making it the border with Gabon. This is also the river where Rio Muni gets its name from. The country is divided into 7 provinces, with the capital Malabo located on Bioko Island. Keep in mind though, they are currently constructing an entirely new capital called Oyala in the future Wele Nzas province, set to be complete in 2020. You know, despite some ongoing protests from citizens, but hey, African politics typically aren't well known for being legislatively accommodating in that field. Rio Muni contains about 80% of the entire country's population, as well as the largest city Bata, found off of the Atlantic coast. The country is kind of small at about 28,000 square kilometers. It's just a little bit bigger than Burundi, but smaller than Albania. Now, due to the recent oil boom, Equatorial Guinea has been able to invest heavily in infrastructure projects like upgrading the 2 largest airports at Malabo and Bata, as well as adding 3 new airports on Annobon and Corsico, as well as inland near the still under construction town of Oyala. Road construction has boomed in the past few decades as well. Towns in the remote eastern rainforest areas now have direct access to places that were previously only accessible by river, or really long, potentially deadly walk where highly aggressive mandrills could attack and eat your face. Speaking of wildlife, Equatorial Guinea may be small, but those scattered insular islands give it quite the range of ecodiversity. The country is of course mainly tropical in its climate, humid and warm year-round. However, the rainy seasons kind of switch off at different parts of the year for the islands versus Rio Muni. From June to August, Rio Muni is dry, whereas Bioko is wet, and then it switches the opposite around December to February. Annobon Island is typically known for being somewhat cloudy all the time. There have been almost no cloudless days registered in their recorded history. The coastal flat plains on Rio Muni rise to interior jungle hills, which, just like their other Congo rainforest neighbors, is filled with minerals like tantalum, gold, diamonds, and bauxite. Yeah, those jungles are loaded with bling. Of course, this allows the country to be a cradle of biodiversity, harboring a monkey haven with dozens of primate species dominating the treetops all over. Despite this, the national animal is actually the giraffe. At about 3,000 meters, the highest peak is Pico Basil, which is the only recorded active volcano in the country that actually erupted in 1932. Now, here's the thing. For most of their history, their economy was heavily centered around forestry and fishing, nothing too crazy. Then 1995 came, and they discovered a ton of oil off the coast, and everything changed. Suddenly, they joined the ranks of becoming one of the top 10 largest African oil exporters, and today, over 95% of their exports are in crude oil or hydrocarbon production. And since the population was so small, they had an influx of revenue to disperse amongst the country. Nonetheless, they are very aware that it won't last forever, and the oil is expected to run out around 2035, so the government actually instituted this plan called the 2020 Plan, a strategic policy that will supposedly allow the country to diversify their revenue sources and industries before time runs out. Of course, this new policy hasn't been shy of a few controversies from the populace, and we'll dive into that right about now. Equatorial Guinea may be going through some economic prosperity seasons, but there are some issues at stake. The people of Equatorial Guinea are unique in that, unlike most African nations, they come from centuries of Spanish influence. First of all, the country is made up of about 800,000 people and has the highest per capita GDP in Africa as of 2016. Keep in mind, this is due to the very small population, hence per capita. Nigeria actually has the largest GDP overall. The country is made up of numerous ethnic and tribal groups, the largest ones being the Fang at about 86%, the Bubi, Booby, at 7%. 5% are made up of smaller groups like the Ndowe, Anaban, Bujeba, and the rest are other groups like Spanish, Chinese, and other Europeans at around 2%, mostly Spanish. Although Spanish is the official language spoken by about 70% of the country, French is commonly spoken as well, especially since they are kind of surrounded by and are forced to interact with French-speaking neighbors. Portuguese is also spoken, which allowed them to join the list of Lusophone nations recently. Nonetheless, most people identify with their specific ethnic group and language first and then speak Spanish as a second language. They became the first non-Francophone nation to join the financial cooperation in Central Africa and use the Central African CFA franc as their currency. They also use the Type C and E electrical outlets at 50 Hz and drive on the right side of the road. In 1968, they gained a relatively smooth independence from Spain, and then, well, you know how it works in Africa. Term 1, having fun. Term 2, watching you. Term 3, oh, you're gonna get assassinated. No, seriously though, this guy was insane. He called himself God and the unique miracle of Africa, drove out a third of his population, he stole the money from the treasury, and on Christmas, he made his soldiers dress up like Santa Clauses and ordered them to execute 150 of his opponents in Malibu Stadium as Mary Hopkins' song "Those Were the Days" blasted on the speakers. True story. Fun side note, his children were whisked away to North Korea before his death, where they grew up and learned Korean. His daughter Monique actually just wrote a memoir. Look it up, it's fascinating. Then his nephew rebelled and started a coup and destroyed the regime. To this day, they claim to be a multi-party democracy. However, in practice, it's more classified as a dictatorship, as Teodoro Nguema Obiang Mange has been president since 1979, and even though there's a controversy behind his rule, people are kind of like, well, at least he's not his uncle. I mean, he did kind of help build the infrastructure, so Nonetheless, wealth distribution is still an ongoing issue. The majority, at around 87% of the country, identifies as Catholic, which is why it was a huge deal when former Pope John Paul II visited Bata in 1982, and the rest are either Protestant or indigenous animist. Culture-wise, Equatorial Guinea has a very vibrant artistic side, noted for their abstract sculpture work, dominated by the Fang and Bubi cultures, especially in the capital Malabo. Artists like sculptor Gabriel Mokolo and cartoonist Ramon Esono Ebale are well known, and international pop star Amphibio, who toured across Europe, who is also a cardiologist on the side, believe it or not. Another notable figure would be Eric the Eel Musambani, who just didn't give up at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. You'll typically see the Ibanga white powder dance happening all over, as it is the national dance of the Fang people, typically done with music played by drums, wooden xylophones, and thumb pianos. Cassava is the staple food mashed up into a paste, and famous dishes include peanut cream chicken with boiled plantain and fish with crushed pumpkin seeds served in a banana leaf. And of course, many of the dishes include Spanish-influenced ingredients and techniques. You can totally find an interesting African-style paella or coquetas. And that's not the only thing they share with Spain. Once again, because of its linguistic properties, Equatorial Guinea is kind of like the small anomaly that sticks out in Africa. First of all, Gabon, Cameroon, and Nigeria are probably their closest African friends, as they have shared centuries of business and culture. Many Fang tribesmen can also be found in these countries as well, which adds a whole other level of kinship. Cameroon did recently shut the border though, after some controversy with a fisherman being killed and 2 missing immigrants. It's a tricky situation. China and the US and South Korea were one of the first ones to jump on that oil boom and invest in Equatorial Guinea in the 90s, and today have embassies for each other. Their best friend, though, would probably have to be Spain. Although European colonialism has always left a sour taste in people's mouths, the Equatorial Guineans actually maintained a somewhat decent relationship with the Spanish, and developed quite close bonds even after they gained independence. Spain still protects them at times of need, and tons of Guineans immigrated to Spain, and the majority of the white population in Equatorial Guinea are Spanish. In conclusion, while the rest of sub-Saharan Africa was squabbling in a cacophony of French and English, with a little bit of Portuguese on the side, this little sliver of land was like, I'm gonna do my own little thing, and I'm here to stay. Deal with it. Stay tuned! Eritrea is coming up next.